I knew something was wrong the moment my father refused to look at me. My name is Emma Carter. I'm 22 years old, and 3 weeks before I was supposed to start college, my parents destroyed everything I had worked for. I walked into our dining room expecting to just discuss tuition payments. Instead, I discovered that the college fund they had promised me my entire life no longer existed. Every dollar was gone. At first, I thought there had been some kind of mistake. Maybe the bank had made an error. Maybe there had been an emergency. But the truth was much worse. My parents had taken the entire fund and given it to my older brother, the same brother who had spent years making terrible decisions, wasting money, and expecting everyone else to fix his problems. While I worked 2 jobs, earned top grades, and planned my future, he partied, dropped out of school, and buried himself in debt. Yet somehow, I was the one expected to sacrifice everything. I sat there in complete shock as my mother explained that family comes first. My father told me my brother needed the money more than I did. Then he said something that I will never forget. "You're smart. You'll figure something out." In that moment, I realized my dreams meant less to them than my brother's mistakes. But what hurt the most wasn't losing the money. It was discovering that they had never intended to choose me. Not really. Looking back, the signs had always been there. This was simply the first time they stopped hiding it. What none of them knew was that their decision would set off a chain of events that would completely destroy the family they were trying so hard to protect. And by the time they realized what they had done, it would already be too late. But before I continue, make sure to subscribe. If you've ever been treated unfairly by family or watched someone play favorites, this story is for you. Subscribe and stay with me until the end. Because what happened after my parents gave my college fund to my brother changed all of our lives forever. My name is Emma Carter. I'm 22 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that if I worked hard enough, my family would eventually see my value. Looking back now, I realize how naive that sounds. The truth is that some people decide your role long before you are old enough to understand it. In my family, my older brother Jason was the golden child, and I was the dependable one. Jason was the child everyone worried about, celebrated, protected, and excused. I was the child everyone expected things from. If Jason brought home average grades, my parents praised him for trying. If I brought home straight A's, they nodded and asked what I could do better next time. When Jason forgot responsibilities, my parents rushed to help him. When I struggled with something, they told me that overcoming challenges would build character. At the time, I convinced myself this was normal. I told myself that every family had different expectations for each child. Besides, I loved my parents, and I wanted to believe they loved me equally. The signs were there, but I ignored them because acknowledging them would have meant accepting a painful reality I wasn't ready to face. As children, Jason and I could not have been more different. He was outgoing, impulsive, and constantly chasing excitement. He hated rules and rarely thought about consequences. I was organized, careful, and focused on long-term goals. While Jason spent weekends hanging out with friends and getting into trouble, I spent mine studying, working on school projects, and planning for the future. Teachers often praised my dedication, but at home, my achievements seemed to disappear into the background. Whenever relatives visited, conversations revolved around Jason's latest adventures, problems, or plans. I learned early that being responsible didn't earn attention. It simply created higher expectations. If I succeeded, it was expected. If Jason succeeded, it was a family celebration. Money was often a sensitive topic in our household. My parents worked hard and weren't wealthy, but they frequently reassured me that they were planning for my future. My father would tell me that education was the one thing nobody could ever take away from me. My mother often spoke about a college fund they had been building for years. Whenever I worried about tuition costs, they reminded me not to stress. "Focus on your grades," my mother would say. "We've got the rest covered." Those words became a source of comfort during some of the most difficult years of my life. Whenever I stayed awake until midnight studying for exams, I believed those sacrifices were moving me closer to a future my family supported. Meanwhile, Jason seemed to move from one mistake to another. He dropped out of community college after only a few months. He switched jobs constantly and never stayed anywhere long enough to build a career. Whenever he got into financial trouble, my parents stepped in. At first, it was small things: a missed rent payment, an overdue credit card bill, car repairs he couldn't afford. Every time, my parents found a way to rescue him. They called it helping family. I called it enabling behavior, though I rarely said so out loud. Whenever I tried to raise concerns, I was told to be more understanding. Jason was finding himself, according to my mother. Apparently, finding yourself required a lot of money and very little accountability. By the time I reached my senior year of high school, I had developed a routine that revolved entirely around preparing for college. I worked part-time at a local bookstore, saved every extra dollar I earned, and spent countless hours filling out scholarship applications. I wasn't doing these things because I expected to pay for college alone. I did them because I wanted to contribute and reduce the burden on my parents. I genuinely believed we were working toward the same goal. Every acceptance letter I received felt like a victory for the entire family. My parents smiled proudly whenever I shared good news. They attended ceremonies, took pictures, and told friends how excited they were about my future. If anyone had told me then that everything was about to change, I would have laughed. I would have said they didn't know my family. I would have defended the people who were about to betray me in the worst way possible. Unfortunately, I was about to learn that sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones capable of hurting you the deepest. And the first crack in that illusion appeared just weeks before I was supposed to start college. A few weeks before college was supposed to begin, I was living what should have been one of the happiest periods of my life. My acceptance letter was hanging on my bedroom wall, my dorm checklist was nearly complete, and I had already started imagining what life would be like on campus. For years, I had dreamed about that moment. I wasn't just excited about earning a degree. I was excited about finally building a future that belonged to me. Every late night study session, every sacrifice, and every difficult decision seemed worth it. Then, one afternoon, my mother called me while I was at work and asked if I could come home early because my parents wanted to discuss something important. Her voice sounded strange, almost nervous, but I assumed it had something to do with tuition paperwork or housing arrangements. I had no reason to think otherwise. After all, they had spent years reassuring me that everything was under control. When I arrived home, the atmosphere felt different immediately. My father was sitting at the dining room table, staring down at his coffee cup. My mother was pacing near the kitchen counter. Neither of them smiled when I walked in. That alone was enough to make me uneasy. I sat down and waited for someone to explain what was going on. Several seconds passed in complete silence. Finally, my father cleared his throat and said there had been a change of plans regarding my college fund. At first, I didn't panic. I assumed they meant a delay, an adjustment, or maybe a financial issue that we could solve together. Then my mother quietly told me that the fund was gone, every dollar. Just like that, gone. I stared at them, certain I had misunderstood. What do you mean it's gone? I asked. My father refused to look at me. My mother took a deep breath and explained that Jason had been struggling financially. Apparently, his debts had become much worse than anyone realized. He was facing collections, legal threats, and the possibility of losing his apartment. Instead of allowing him to face the consequences of his choices, my parents had decided to use the money they had saved for my education to rescue him. I felt like the air had been knocked out of my lungs. Years of promises disappeared in a single sentence. The future I had spent my entire life preparing for had been handed to someone else without my knowledge or consent. The more they explained, the worse it became. This hadn't been a last-minute emergency decision. They had known about it for months. They had discussed it privately. They had transferred the money. Throughout that entire time, they continued acting as though my college plans were secure. They smiled at graduation photos. They congratulated me on scholarships. They listened to me talk excitedly about campus life, all while knowing that the money was already gone. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was emotional. They had lied to my face repeatedly. Then came the excuses. My mother said family had to support one another during difficult times. My father argued that Jason was in a crisis and needed immediate help. They spoke as though they were making a noble sacrifice instead of stealing opportunities from one child to protect another. Every explanation felt like another knife twisting deeper. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning inside me since the conversation began. What about me? The room became silent. My mother looked uncomfortable. My father sighed heavily. Then he delivered the sentence that would stay with me for years. You're smart, Emma. You'll figure something out. That was it. No apology, no alternative plan, no concern for my future. Just an expectation that I would somehow absorb the consequences of their decision, because I had always been the responsible one. In that moment, something inside me shifted. For years, I had convinced myself that the favoritism I noticed growing up wasn't real. I told myself I was imagining things, but now there was no denying it. My brother's mistakes had become more important than my dreams. My hard work had become a resource they felt entitled to sacrifice. They didn't see me as a daughter whose future deserved protection. They saw me as the child who would quietly endure whatever burden they placed on her shoulders. I wanted to scream, I wanted to cry, I wanted to demand answers. Instead, I sat there in complete silence. The pain was too deep for anger. Eventually, I stood up, thanked them for their honesty, and walked out of the room. My parents looked relieved, as if my calm reaction meant everything would be fine. What they didn't understand was that they hadn't solved a problem that day. They had created one. Because the moment I walked away from that table, I stopped seeing them as people I could trust. And once trust is broken, rebuilding it is far more difficult than anyone realizes. What happened next would change the course of all our lives forever. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the conversation in my head, hoping I had misunderstood something. But every time I remembered my father's words, the reality became impossible to ignore. My future had been traded away to protect my brother from the consequences of his choices. The next morning, I started calling financial aid offices, scholarship programs, and student loan providers. While my parents were busy helping Jason recover from another disaster, I was trying to save my own future. What hurt most wasn't the money. It was realizing that nobody in my family seemed concerned about what would happen to me. Jason never even called to apologize. In fact, he acted as though he deserved the help. That was the moment I stopped expecting fairness from my family and started focusing entirely on myself. The next few years were some of the hardest of my life. I worked multiple jobs while attending classes. There were days when I left home before sunrise and didn't return until after midnight. I survived on cheap meals, secondhand textbooks, and pure determination. Meanwhile, social media showed Jason enjoying vacations, buying expensive gadgets, and living a lifestyle he still couldn't afford. Every time I saw it, I remembered where that money had come from. But instead of letting bitterness destroy me, I used it as motivation. Every challenge became fuel. Every obstacle reminded me that success would mean more because I earned it myself. Slowly, things began to change. My grades remained excellent. Professors noticed my dedication. Opportunities started appearing. After graduation, I landed a position at a growing company that valued hard work and discipline. Within a few years, I was earning more money than anyone in my family expected. Promotions followed. Investments grew. Eventually, I purchased my own home. For the first time in my life, I felt completely independent. Ironically, the future my parents had taken away forced me to become stronger than I ever would have been otherwise. While I was building stability, Jason continued repeating the same cycle of bad decisions. New debts replaced old debts. New excuses replaced old excuses. And once again, my parents were always there to rescue him. The difference was that now their resources were running out. The phone call came on a rainy afternoon. My mother sounded exhausted. Years of financially supporting Jason had drained their savings. Medical bills were piling up. Retirement plans had collapsed. For the first time, they weren't calling to help Jason. They were calling because they needed help themselves. Suddenly, the daughter whose future had been sacrificed became important again. They invited me to dinner, praised my accomplishments, and spoke about family unity. I listened quietly, remembering how little family unity mattered when I needed them. Every compliment felt hollow. Every kind word arrived years too late. A few weeks later, I sat at the same dining room table where everything had changed years earlier. This time, the power dynamic was different. My parents explained their situation and eventually asked if I could help financially. Then they said something unbelievable. They believed I owed it to the family because I was successful. I looked around the room and realized they still didn't understand what they had done. They saw my success but ignored the sacrifices that created it. Calmly, I reminded them of the college fund. I reminded them of the promises they broke. I reminded them of the day they chose Jason over me. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever experienced. For years, I imagined revenge as something dramatic. But when the opportunity finally arrived, I realized the best revenge wasn't cruelty. It was boundaries. I didn't scream. I didn't insult them. I simply told them that the money I earned belonged to me, just as they had once decided my future belonged to Jason. I wished them well. but I refused to become responsible for problems they had spent years creating. For the first time, they were forced to face the consequences of their choices. As I walked away from that house, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. They had taken my college fund, they had broken my trust, but they never broke me. In the end, I built a life without their help, and that became the one thing they could never take away. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't destroying the people who hurt you. It's succeeding so completely that they are forced to watch you thrive without them. And that's exactly what I did. Looking back now, I no longer feel angry when I think about what happened. For a long time, I believed my parents had stolen my future. But the truth is, they only changed the path I took to reach it. What hurt me most was never the money. It was realizing that the people I trusted the most were willing to sacrifice my dreams to protect someone who never appreciated their sacrifices. That lesson was painful, but it taught me something invaluable. Your worth should never depend on other people's approval. Today, I have a successful career, financial stability, and a life I built with my own hands. My parents still struggle with the consequences of the choices they made, and Jason still looks for someone else to solve his problems. As for me, I finally found peace the moment I stopped expecting fairness from people who had never intended to give it. So now I want to ask you something. If you were in my position, would you have helped your parents after everything they did? Or would you have walked away just like I did? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more family betrayal and revenge stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.